we're here today to talk about perspectives from the advertising world and from particularly a commercial view on how media publishing can pay its way in the future. So we'll have a look at some of the things that we already know a little bit about, display advertising and search and so on. Branded content is a new thing, which we've got some experience on the panel to discuss. And overall, how will these new economics affect journalism? So I'm very pleased to be joined here today by some great experience to talk about this topic. On the far left, Marina Go. Marina is General Manager of Hearst Bauer Media. This is a joint venture between Bauer Media and Hearst Magazines. I'm sure many of you will be well aware of their titles. Marina was previously CEO of Private Media, Australia's leading independent digital publisher, which includes Crikey, Smart Company, Women's Agenda, Startup Smart, and a number of other titles. Marina has 25 years of leadership experience in the media and started her career as a journalist. So we've got a lot of editorial experience here. Next to Marina is Neil Ackland. Neil is the founder and CEO of Diversified Media. It's a diversified media company, I should say, called
we should change our name.
Sound Alliance. Neil has had a lot of experience in digital media and was in fact named one of the top 10 most powerful people in digital media by the Power Index, which is something we ought to be very scared of. But he's got a lot of very good experience to talk about how digital has changed over the last 5 to 10 years, and we'll look forward to hearing some of those insights. Next to Neil is Zach. Zach Zavos is the co-founder and managing director of Conversant Media, another online independent publishing company that produces websites such as Lost at E Minor and the sports opinion site The Raw. And finally, but not lastly, next to myself and between Zach is Ben Barren. And Ben is the founder of SocialDesk.com.au, which develops new types of performance social advertising. Ben is an expert in tracking brands in social media. And has lots of experience in search and social media. So Ben's the data guy on this panel, and we're going to talk a little bit about data and how that relates to new forms of advertising. But before we get into some of those details, I thought I'd just ask each of the panellists to give a very brief, quick overview of what they see as being individual challenges and opportunities within their business area and how they're dealing with that today, and then we'll get on to some forward-looking perspectives. So, Ben, I might start with you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I came from a background of building a blog search engine and working at some of the large publishers, like 9MSM when they started, and at Census. And when blogging came around, absolutely loved it. Quit my job, wrote 936 blog posts in the first year, was indexing 100,000 blogs. But out of that, I started tracking a lot of brands and social media. And following that, I've got really into sort of new types of Facebook advertising. But typically, to get Australian, the challenge is getting Australian businesses to sort of adopt best practice from overseas is a bit slow. So when people say you're in Facebook advertising, it's sort of like those awful ads on Facebook, and I'm like, no. And so, that's my current challenge.
That sounds like a large one. Zach, what about you?
Well, I set up our business in 2007, and they started Lost at E Minor. 2005 was a hobby, a blog, and then we set up The Raw in 2007 again as a sort of a blog, the business sort of evolved from there, and I knew a lot of the elements of running an online business in terms of traffic, in terms of content and platform. But the kind of one area I always struggled with is well, how do you really make money out of it? And I spent the last 7 years really tackling that and looking at what other businesses have been doing. Private Media, Sound Alliance has been a very inspirational business. And so we're at the point now, I think we know a lot. I feel I've got some good views about where it's going, and it's a really interesting place to be right now because media's back, and from a number of years media was a very problematic space. So I feel very encouraged about where our business is at, and also where online media is generally.
Terrific. Neil, what are your thoughts?
So I mean, I started Sound Alliance when I was 22. So I've been doing it for a while. Back in 2000, I'm showing my age now. Much like Zach, it was a hobby. Our first website was called In The Mix, and it's still one of our biggest sites today. It's like a dance music website. I'm an ex-raver. So basically, well, current, depending which way you look at it. We expanded our business model, which is kind of niche verticals around kind of youth interest areas, and we have a site called Faster Louder, which is kind of live music. We have a gay and lesbian site called Same Same, and this the site that we launched in 2013 was really to try and address one of the biggest challenges that we've been facing, which is we started to notice this really profound shift in audience behaviour to mobile from desktop. And at the same time, we started to notice a pronounced shift in the way media was being bought and traded and sold. Display media was being sold more by robots than by human beings. Mm-hmm. And these two things were kind of happening at the same time to us, and we decided we had to come up with a response to this, because otherwise we could pretty much see that our business was going to be in trouble. So around 2012, we commissioned the biggest research study ever done into young Australians, and we looked at all the data and all the insights, and we sat in a room with effectively a blank canvas and said, okay, what would a media brand of the future look like? And we came up with this idea for Junkie, which is our newest site, which launched in 2013. And the publishing principles behind Junkie were really simple. We knew the audience was shifting to mobile, and that wasn't going to slow down, so it had to be built mobile first in terms of the way it's designed. The whole product had to come through the mobile lens first, then the tablet, then the desktop. We knew that it had to be social at the core, because when we looked at the data, we could see that over 93% of our audience were on Facebook every single day. And Facebook essentially is the new homepage of the internet. It's what feeds almost all of your traffic. So we knew that we had to build this thing to plug into Facebook in terms of the technology, but also the tone of voice and how the content was created. We knew that the advertising model couldn't be just display advertising. We had to do something different. We need to create an ad that was agnostic on mobile and on desktop. And so these are all the challenges that we were trying to face at that time, and we came up with the idea of Junkie, which has probably been the most successful product we've launched, to be honest. It was Mumbrella Media Brand of the Year this year, and has grown phenomenally for us. So I think we haven't solved the challenge yet, but we feel like we're very, very close. And the business model behind Junkie is primarily native advertising, which is we define as advertising that's delivered in-stream, inspired by a brand, clearly signposted. And so that's been going really, really well for us. It's now become almost 30% of our total revenue is coming from native. So it's been a learning curve. We're not quite there yet, but we think we're onto something with solving our biggest challenge, which is basically the shift to mobile.
Terrific. We'll come back to that native question in a minute. But Marina, I'm interested. You've got a different kind of demographic. I mean, Neil's demographic to yours. Your audience is a little bit different. What are some of the challenges and opportunities you're seeing?
Interestingly, because with most of my brands, we're targeting women. Obviously, targeting women with the Hearst titles, but a very similar challenge in that, particularly for Cosmo. Which is probably the same age group as Junkie, but probably a slightly different point of reference. It's all about mobile first. So we saw a massive shift towards mobile, and so every decision is around mobile first. And in fact, we have more subscribers via our mobile app than we have buying the actual magazine, which is an opportunity. I mean, I see that as a fantastic opportunity, because ultimately, when you're looking at a brand, you're actually selling to advertisers a pot of consumers. And so one of the challenges is moving the mindset away from it just being, the print audience is more valuable than the digital audience. And I think that's a big challenge for us as publishers to sell to the advertising community. I don't think we do it very well as an industry, and we certainly haven't done it very well yet as a business. And so that's the next thing for us. And then underlying all of that, obviously there's a massive cost associated with putting out magazines, and prior to the 3 weeks that I have spent back in print, I spent 7 years in digital media with pure play digital businesses, and that is a different opportunity or different challenge, obviously, but the cost structure is a hell of a lot lower. But I have to say that the multi-platform opportunity it does make this a much bigger and more exciting opportunity for me in terms of what I'm doing on a daily basis. So, I think it's really the opportunity for us in the future is really around getting people to think differently. So even getting the editorial teams to create content for print and digital media. So that's a new thing that I'm putting in place right now with the Hearst titles. That's different because, the way you think about print and digital in terms of content creation is entirely different. Print people are fortune tellers. You have to be thinking about what people want 3 months out, and digital people are right now, what's happening right now. So I think people are the challenge, and how we mobilise them and get them to think differently from a content creation point of view, and also from an advertising buying point of view.
Some interesting thoughts occurring whilst I was listening. That one is that in some ways the media industry is still supported by advertising. So over the last 20 years, we've seen enormous changes in technology and platforms and distribution channels. But some of the things that we're still looking at now are still the same. So selling advertising. What I'd like to ask here is what formats? We have an array of formats. Mobile's one, native's another, display still on all websites. What do you see as being the right mixes for your business, and where it's really all about maintaining margins, growing margins, and keeping yields as high as possible? So where are you spending your time? And perhaps I'll start with Zach. I know you've got some nice, interesting new formats coming through. How are you seeing the mix of those playing out in your business?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting space that most of the industry is still geared around standard ad formats, which everyone sees on every website, a leaderboard, MREC, some sort of slight variations on those. There's a lot of infrastructure behind those ad formats. So, and there, as Neil was alluding to before, they're being programmatically traded. And so there's...
Let me just quickly...
Sure.
Programmatic, for those in the audience who may have heard the term but don't know it, what are we talking about?
Well, so basically what happens... you go.
I was going to say, it's the robots.
The robots that Neil was talking about a few minutes ago. How does that work? Just
in a nutshell, when you go to a website, if you go to The Age and you look at a car review, you'll have a cookie put on your computer indicating that you're interested in cars. Then when you go to another site and there's some ad spaces, in milliseconds, those ad spaces, unless they've been sold to a premium sponsor, in milliseconds, those cookies on your computer get surfaced up, and a whole raft of ad networks bid in real time. And if someone wants to reach someone who's looking to buy a car, then they'll pay more, and they pay usually 1 cent more than the second bidder, and they bid and they get the ad slot in front of you. So that's and you could talk about this literally days. It's a very complex area, but in a nutshell, that's how it works. It's real time programmatic trading of inventory of ad slots based on people or behaviours derived. But I guess my point is there's a huge amount of infrastructure. There's a lot of money going into this programmatic bidding. But the problem is that they're bidding on ad formats which aren't particularly good. And we sell these formats. Everyone does. It's part of the industry. But there are better ways to advertise. And I don't think anyone would say that they click on... I think the standard click-through rate on a banner ad is 0.02%.
So that's a matter of creative then?
It's a problem that the standard mechanism for advertising is a strip to the side of content. It's not particularly strong. And so I think what we're all facing here is there are better ways to advertise. There are better ways to bring brands in front of consumers and into the content. And this is where we, as a business, and probably most people here, are really putting a lot of energy, and it's very exciting.
We have a quote that we use in the office for this, which is stop interrupting what people are interested in and be what people are interested in. And that's the kind of ethos we try and apply to the advertising. And banner ads, typically, that's why TV is still so strong, is that, you don't see too often things popping up in front of the screen trying to grab your attention, or a fart button appearing at the side whilst you're watching a movie or something. It's the content, it's there, it's a one-to-one experience, and then there's an ad break. And print still does that really well. So magazine advertising is still really great in that when you're looking at an ad, and then when you're looking at the content, whereas online just smashes it all together. And
that's another important point, isn't it? I remember when I started at Fairfax Business Media many years ago, the advertising manager said to me that editorial was the grout between the tiles of advertising, which I was horrified by. But of course he was right in many ways, and we're still dealing with that and today. So I guess I'd like to hear a bit more about what you see as being those some of those creative challenges. I know that B of the web is particularly relevant for native advertising, but when we're just still thinking about that problem around creative, because ever since the advent of the web, banners, buttons, MREX, towers, vertical ads, they're all really doing the same thing. But how do we get those is it possible to get those click-through rates above 0.02%?
I think click-through is an irrelevant measure altogether, and I think it really depends what you're trying to do with your advertising. If you're trying to get someone to consider your brand, or you're trying to get them to click through and buy a flight or a hotel room or sign up for a car drive or something like that, they're completely different objectives. And I think the current advertising world of MREX and all that stuff is really well geared towards direct response advertising, which is the click through and sign up, or click through and do this. What is underserved in online at the moment is brand advertising, be able to deliver a really cohesive brand message, which is why I think the shift towards native advertising is really gaining some momentum.
You can't build a brand on leaderboards and MREX,
no.
Which is why it's not happened, and so much branding dollars has gone into TV because you can in TV, but now there are ways to build brands online. Before we get onto TV or video, because that's another important area, Ben, what are your thoughts around this brand building versus transactional spacing?
I think sometimes the ad format can be overdone. My first job is a media planning department, and the classic line of a media planning is the right ad to the right audience at the right time in the right format. The format comes at the end. The audience profiling at the start, the target market. If I buy a car once every 5 years, what's the point of getting an ad for a car just after I've bought it? You're going on a holiday once every 2 years. When do you do your research? So on and so forth. So you've got to you can do the best ad, the best creative, but if someone doesn't have the money in your pocket to buy it, or you're not in the market, you're not in the market. And so I think all the format stuff's totally right, but there's the audience profiling. Something like an infinite range of techniques to target. Literally on Facebook, they have sort of over 500 buying characteristics that you can target people on. So I think that bit's really interesting. The actual getting the audience right before you then get into the discussion of what's the format, what's the objective. So just to simplify that a little bit, that's data that you're talking about. That's data of you log into like I'm using the Facebook example, but Twitter's doing the same thing. These are techniques that, like when I was at Census, if you do a keyword search, we're on Yellow Pages, really targeted. People do a search for handyman, but then we'd have people going onto the AFL website, very untargeted. But the cookie approach, it's been done for since the 90s. You can follow that cookie person from Yellow Pages to the AFL site. If you ring up a business and they've got your email address, you can target that person on Facebook. If they visit your website, you can target them on Facebook. So there's a range of measures. You can create profiles of people based on the existing database of emails or phone numbers. You've got products like Facebook custom audiences, Facebook lookalike audiences. So yeah, it's interesting. And as publishers, the data you're collecting data of your customers, your audience as well. And how do you use that to feed into the sales process?
Do you want to go?
Go. Well, I think that the learnings for us, and this is across now 3 different companies for me, are that it's really dangerous to just assume that one size fits all. And so making sure that you really understand what's most effective for your audience, because, surprise, surprise, for one of my previous sites in private media, the skyscraper or the half-page ad, which is a brand ad, was much more effective than anything else. And then on other sites, not effective at all. So you really do need to understand the audience and what works, and data helps you do that to some degree, obviously. But also, this term we keep referring to, which is native advertising, which is really the old form of advertorial in magazines. Again, it comes back to the fact that the people who actually create the best native advertising are journalists of those brands, who know those brands, and of course the least likely to want to do that at this point, so that's the challenge. But again, you measure that through data. So yeah, we collect a lot of data, and for our bigger brands, you could segment and you geo-target and all those things that you can do. But ultimately, you just need to know your audience really, really well, and that data helps you do that.
Having worked on a lot of subscription products, but also on products that are, I guess, not so much focused around the subscription data. What do you see as being the relative merits of those two approaches from a data enrichment point of view? Yeah.
Well, I mean, from a subscription, for people who obviously pay for a subscription, you obviously can gather a lot more information about them. It's a very different model. I mean, subscription is a very difficult product to make work via the internet, and so you really need a very strong point of difference and a reason to go there. So data helps you refine that constantly, but I don't think there's any difference in how you'd want to refine and define your audience, because we have to do the same thing for advertisers to prove the worthiness of that audience. And so we're constantly in a subscription audience having to understand the likes and things that they don't like, and because ultimately all you want to do is increase your subscriptions. So we use it in the same way, actually.
I'd just say, data to me is now, it's about looking at your audience, and yes, we do a lot of that, but it's also used more and more internally within editorial teams. So, just for example, we use tools which let us split test headlines, which we'll do every day. We have a homepage optimizer, which will programmatically say it's 11 a.m. That article at the top isn't getting this click through. If you put this one here, you increase your clicks by X amount of percent. Now, we always overlay editorial judgment on it. It's not just a data thing, but it's immensely powerful getting that input. And then it's looking at videos are a big focus, and we run a lot of analysis over what time of the day we're getting video views, what days of the week, and overlay all that with what's actually happening in sport, and then work out strategies to address. So right now on the Raw, our sports site, Thursdays is a quiet day for video views. So and the data tells us that clearly. So we're now looking at editorial initiatives to boost that around lunchtime, things like that.
So just pursuing this question around video a little bit further, again, Marina and Neil, can you talk a little bit about some of the video initiatives you're working on, and perhaps Ben, is there anything in data and video that you're looking at?
Facebook has launched video advertising, so they've been going through this whole sort of, because basically branded advertising is bigger, colourful, it's visual, but video formats are also, shorter, the sort of Snapchat to Vine, 6 to 15 second format. Images are shorter, text is shorter, but so there's lots of how does brand advertising, how's it going to work within social networks without interrupting people too much while achieving the brand objectives. Direct response branded advertising, I guess. But
was that sort of similar thing you're doing with your recent TV launch?
Cosmo TV, yeah. Well, what we've done with Cosmo TV, in the past everyone went crazy and said everyone wants to buy video, so there was a mad scramble, I think, for all publishers to try and work out how quickly and effectively and cheaply we could provide video content, and the truth is we just couldn't do it in any great volume. And also the CPMs are really low around it, so you did a lot of activity to make very little money. So what we've done with Cosmo TV is we've really gone down the native advertising route. And so with the series that we launched last week, that was entirely sponsored by The Body Shop, so it's a 12-part TV series. The editorial teams are, we film them doing whatever they do, and they paid a significant amount of money for it. So that's how we received higher CPMs. And on the day that we launched, 2 major clients approached us and said we want exactly the same thing. So I think that's the opportunity for the future, certainly for my brands and the way that women interact with video. But it may well be different for other brands, because again, I think it's really important that you know who your audience is and what they respond to. Because the views are really important. How many people are going to view the video? That's
what I was going to ask. That's what they're measuring their success rate on.
Exactly.
So the return is about the number of views and the time.
Yeah, that's what I think that's one of the great things about the whole native content idea, is that essentially good content is good content and shit content is shit content. It's the quality that's going to shine through, and whether there's a brand inspiring that content or not is kind of irrelevant. At the end of the day, you've got to produce something that's going to get people's attention, and attention is the the great economy of today, because everyone's just being bombarded with all of this information from all angles. So holding someone for a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes is getting harder and harder. So from an advertiser's point of view, rather than being around the outside screaming for attention, I'd much rather be in a contextually relevant environment in the stream, actually in the first screen that people are looking at, or in the actual body of the content in a relevant way that tells their brand story. And that's getting that challenge right. If you get it wrong, no one's going to look at it. If you get it right, and there is a sweet spot, and there's some really good precedents and examples of that, it can really deliver for the brand, for the publisher who's getting paid for it and producing good content, and I think for the end viewer or reader who's actually consuming something that they like and they're prepared to share through their social network. So done well, it can tick everybody's box.
Do you think there's a risk over time that clients who have ongoing success with this kind of native advertising eventually become their own publishers and cut you guys out?
I mean, that's already happening. If you look at Red Bull, for example, Red Bull Media House is a sort of break-even business that they're running out of Santa Monica in the US, and they're just producing content. They've got their own cable TV station, their own magazine, their own online radio station, and they're producing content for themselves that tells their brand story. It's the ultimate native advertising play, if you like. So I think there is a risk of that, but you also still need other contextually relevant channels to plug into that to give you the broader reach. And you don't want to preach to the choir. And there was this period for a while where everyone was like, we build our Facebook page, we get 1 million likes, and then we don't need to advertise anywhere. We can just tell all those people that like Coca-Cola to, every day we'll send them a message. And that's great, but it doesn't get you anybody new. And eventually Zuckerberg just came along and said, nah, we'll cut that off. And now they can't reach anyone through their Facebook pages, or very small amounts through the Facebook page. So it's an interesting challenge, but I still think there's always going to be a need for, quality, trusted brand mastheads in media that people respect and will go to for an informed opinion. And I think brands will always need to exist in those environments to reach new people.
A brand has also got a lot of, there's a lot of gravity in a brand towards telling the brand message on basically as an ad. Whereas, native, as Neil's talking about the way we do it, it's, I'd probably disagree a little bit, Marina, and say that to me it's not advertorial in the sense that very rarely would we almost never would we write an article about a brand. It's more about picking up one or two key attributes of the brand message and then writing content around those attributes, which there's ads surrounding that. So it might be, the surface. We're doing a campaign at the moment. We're getting, encouraging artists to actually create art on the surface, or DJs or whatever, and they're actually using the product. And then it's really good content. Or we're picking up attributes around things that are surprisingly powerful, small but powerful. So we're writing stories about things that are small and powerful. It's not about the surface, it's about the attribute of the product. So to me, there's a subtle distinction, but an important one because it makes the content strong.
Yeah, I agree with that distinction as well. But I think the other big distinction between advertorial and magazine ads and all those things, I joke about this quite a bit, but social is the difference, right? So someone said, magazine ads are native ads, and I say, well, when did you see someone cut a magazine ad out, photocopy it 1,000 times and mail it to all their friends? And that's the big difference, right? Because if someone likes this content, they're going to share it through their social network, so the ad and the message can spread further and wider.
So you had a very pertinent experience of that recently.
Yeah. So we had a campaign that we had running for about 5 months for Stoli vodka, and it ran across all of our titles, and it was all native, so there was very little display advertising. And the brief was Stoli wanted to be the original vodka. And so they said to us, can you create a content series about originality? And it's the best brief ever. You sit down, 15 editors, and you say, okay, here's a pot of money. We want you to go out there and find original stories. And they go, brilliant. And off they went. And there was some fantastic stuff that came through. And one story in particular was a great example of timeliness and relevance. There was a show on about In Excess, and they did a story about the inside story of Original Sin, which was the In Excess record. And we published it when the TV show was on, and the In Excess guys liked it so much they shared it to their 3 or 4 million Facebook fans and through their Twitter feed. And so they thought it was such a good piece of content, they didn't mind that it was funded by Stoli, that they were prepared to share that through their own social network. And that's the holy grail.
They probably had a few stollies themselves over the years.
Probably.
Yeah. I guess it's a good opportunity to ask you guys to have a look at the crystal ball in this context of this discussion. We've talked a little bit about where the advertising formats have come from over the last 10 years and where we're at now with this native advertising is a key thing. And one of the things I think is fascinating is that, Neil, you've said that native makes up about 30% of your business at the moment. Is that an optimum number for you? Do you see that? Would you like that to be more? Obviously, having more clients spending money is the answer is yes. But in terms of the mix as a publisher, is that the right kind of mix?
We get asked this question a lot, actually, about the mix, and I think we probably do. I think it's about less than 1% of all the content we produce is native content at the moment. So, if that got to be a lot higher than that, then I'd you know.
Oh, sorry. Less than 1% of the content, but 30% of the revenue of the income.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a big.
That
speaks
speaks
big
volumes
yeah.
in
So
terms of the.
So if we're in a position where 1 in every 3 stories was native, then I think we'd be onto something pretty good. But I don't think we'd ever get to that point. I think that's a really important consideration. Is that it's still coming through. It's still maturing.
That leads to the question of journalism, though, which I didn't really want to get into today because it is a whole different area. But Marina, do those figures kind of resonate in terms of your business as well? Is that the sort of thing that you'd be expecting?
Well, because you obviously have the print revenue stream. So the model at the moment, and the 3 businesses are quite different, but for a magazine like Harper's Bazaar, it's about 60-40 in terms of ad revenue, 60 circ revenue, 40. But even within the ad revenue mix, it's a huge pot, and I'm constantly looking for new revenue streams because that's my job. And so there's traditional agency advertising. There is programmatic, which is the remnant stuff. There is integrated direct partnerships, which is native, and then also events. So it's the major part of it is still agency, but it's in decline because, and I found this at private media too. We had to, we launched the whole integrated selling and event strategy because we could see that the agency revenue is coming off, and it's not that there's not as much of it, but they want to spend less, so they want more for less. For a lower CPM, and if you're a niche publisher, then you need a high CPM in order to make money. So the business models are quite different depending on the product. I mean, Cosmo, because it's more of a mass product, has a higher percentage of circulation revenue. In fact, it's the opposite of Harper's. So yeah, it just depends on the product. But the one thing that I wanted to say actually about revenue in the future is that what we've noticed is that we have to get out of this thing of believing that readers are coming to us and coming to one destination, so even an online destination. So when we did Cosmo TV, part of the strategy was to have it on YouTube and actually have views on Facebook, because we don't care where it's viewed from a client's point of view, as long as the brand gets viewed. And it's a really different view to, even recent times where everyone thought that the video had to be viewed on the website to get the traffic to the website. So I think we're looking at brands that are now made up of a whole bunch of different components where readers are viewing and interacting with the brand in a lot of different places. And so that's the opportunity.
And that has a huge impact on the cost base as well, because if you're not building your own or hosting your own video platforms, you're saving a lot of money.
That's right.
I'll pick up on a point you made about the agency spend decreasing, and just ask Ben. You spend a lot of time working with and around agencies. It seems to me that the advertising industry is going through the same or parallel changes and huge changes that the media industry is. How important do you think it is that they are able to reconnect? Is the advertising world of agencies something that's going to continue to be as important as it was traditionally, or is that day past?
Many people have predicted the death of the advertising agency, but it keeps sort of being reborn. I mean, some of the businesses here might almost have an agency element too, but I mean, at a most basic level, a brief comes out for a client, and then different people sometimes fight for part of the brief. theoretically at the top level, a client has sort of gone, well, people spend this much time on various parts of their media time. So people might spend, I'm just making up a number, but 10% of their time on social networks. They should then receive 10% of the actual media spend. But at the moment in Australia, it barely receives 1%. I mean, at 9MSM, when I was there, our census, we went through this similar battle with banner advertising, or you would have at Fairfax, getting the right amount of share, and even on some of these other properties where you've got 70,000 people reading the magazine, but 2 million on the website. Clients still would spend more money on the brand television advertising. Small businesses have shifted a lot of their advertising from Yellow Pages to Google. I think what's sort of interesting now is you might see a lot of Google advertising shift to the brand budgets, but does that mean Facebook is going to take money from what's been sort of like Channel 9 money? And Facebook's a small team in Australia, but quite aggressive in agencies, and more so, they like going direct to the client. So there is a lot of interesting sort of, battles going on.
Mm. That's it's food for thought as well. Are there any other comments quickly about advertising in terms of display? Because I just want to very quickly touch on search. We haven't spent any time talking about search. It's a huge part of the spend in Australia on an annual basis. Any quick thoughts about where it's at in terms of the moment for your businesses? Is it part of the mix? Is it going to continue to grow? Is it on its way? I'm not going to say it's on its way out, but is it declining or is it flatlining in Australia?
It's not really our world at all, to be honest. So
My view is that programmatic is freeing up efficiencies in media agency world, and the capacity that will be left will focus in on what I would say is better advertising. And so I think while programmatic is driving the yields right down, so strangely enough, even though it's really targeted, they're paying cents. But what's left over, we focus on better campaigns. And so I think it's going to be a really positive step, because people are spending time online and on mobiles, and you need to do better advertising and better executions, which should be freed up.
So the consensus would be more around brand building, brand spend, than where we've seen a lot of money over the last 10 years in transactions and search.
You still got to have, there's still certain businesses like the car, I've worked a lot in automotive, you've got the BMW brand, the manufacturer, they love making beautiful ads and they get artists to do YouTube clips. The car dealer is like on Saturday, wants to get people into the dealership and sell the car, sell the finance, sell the insurance. Harvey Norman wants to sell whatever he's selling.
But Harvey Norman doesn't believe in the web.
Yeah, that's right.
Jerry doesn't.
We should tax those purchases and add 10%, and then he can set an online store up. But then Kogan will take the share. So, yeah, it's. I still think like sales business is about selling something.
Yeah. Okay. Look, we're going to have questions in a few minutes, but let me just quickly go around and get a crystal ball view from everyone. What do you see is let's not go too far out, but the next couple of years, where is the advertising spend going? Where are your new sources of revenue likely to come from? Perhaps start with Marina.
From what I can see, we are at the beginning of this kind of native boom. So I think certainly for my products, that's the big opportunity. Much more integration, much more direct selling to clients rather than through agency. But I see events as a huge opportunity for niche brands for brands actually, because it's back to community, and in the same way that digital managed to corral community groups online. You'd be so excited when you see those same people offline in a room meeting each other, and that's such an opportunity. So it's a part of the business that I put my toe in the water just before I left private media, and really there was some fantastic dividends. And so I think it's a big opportunity for a women's business, particularly because women love to network. So yeah, that's where I think our business is heading. And will your editors play a role or a key role in that as well? Yeah, and the great thing about I think magazines traditionally have always had a very personal relationship with their audience, and it was the most personal medium, I guess, until digital. So they speak to them, I guess, in some capacity now, but they've always been up for that, and they've always been quite visible, and readers love to meet them. They're celebrities, so this is a good opportunity.
We've had a lot of success with events as well. In the Mix does an annual awards ceremony, which is quite a big driver for us. We do a big conference every year, so events is important for us for the future. I mean, native is a big focus for us. I think that what we're seeing is our display revenues are slowly declining or holding steady, and our CPMs are pretty steady. So display advertising, there's life in the old dog yet. It's going to be around for a long time, but there's not much growth there. So the growth area for us we see at the moment is native. And I think the real sweet spot there is that the value of a piece of native content is the same on mobile as it is on desktop. And that's the big difference. Mobile display versus desktop display, the difference in yield is so big that as the audience continues to shift, so everyone's audiences are shifting to mobile. And so unless you can solve that problem of how do I get the same or better or even close to the same yield from someone on a mobile phone as I do on a desktop, then everyone's going to be in trouble. And I think that's the thing that should be keeping media CEOs awake at night, because it's the problem that's coming down the line. Yeah. I think you still see a lot of publishers talking about the shift from newspaper to the web, and we're talking about the shift from desktop to mobile, and that's a much bigger problem.
Yeah, I agree that.
Look, again, agree completely. Just look at a bus; everyone's on the mobile phones. I think what's going to happen is TV currently commands enormous share of advertising revenue, and people aren't watching the TV the same way. I think those dollars will start coming into the online space through pre-roll ads, and pre-roll is traded programmatically, and that will then wash back into TV, and TV will effectively become another screen. And when that happens, I just think people are going to be watching pre-roll video on their phones, and they'll be seeing pre-roll ads, and that'll be TV dollars. And I think that's one way of really commercialising your online audiences.
Great.
Run a lot of reports, and Instagram, I'm amazed when I run some of the numbers on Instagram, especially in the younger audiences, also the young mums audience. Some of the numbers are huge, and so I think Facebook's going to really push that. YouTube also just can't be discounted. If Google start using YouTube to get media rights, like in the AFL negotiation, the internet rights are going to really go up in the next thing. So I think YouTube's going to be interesting. My final one would be Oculus Rift and Facebook. I think that's...
Oculus what?
Oculus Rift, the virtual reality headset that Facebook bought, that they're going to merge into the VR headset. It sounds crazy. VR is right at the start. People think it couldn't be done, but it's supposedly... I haven't done it, but supposedly real. And Google trying to counter that move by... the Uber $500 million investment they've got in driverless cars to take you to a retail store.
Lots to consider there. We've got a few minutes to take some questions from the floor. So I hope there are some people with microphones standing by if there are questions. We have to finish at 2:00 on the dot because Neil's got to run to the airport. So I'm just letting you know we'll take as many as we can till then. Yes.
Yeah. Hello. I'm interested in the native advertising thing, and I'm just wondering if it's hard to get a brand to let you take control of the message. When you're sort of talking to them, okay, you pick out the key elements, but we're going to write a story about this. How do you talk the agency into letting you take control?
You're right, it's definitely a challenge. But what we've found is we have this policy in place where either party can strike it out at any point. So if we get to a point where we've produced a story or a feature and the brand is not happy, they can kill it. And on the same side, if the editorial guys feel like they're being pressured too much by the brand to affect their art form, they can kill it too. So we've always had that in place. We thought it's a nice little fail-safe there to make sure that there's protections on both sides in terms of our editorial integrity and also in terms of what the brand's trying to do. We've not had many examples where that has happened, but there's definitely more to and fro, and it does work a lot better when you have a direct relationship with the brand manager or the marketing manager who's making the ultimate decision and knows their brand. But sometimes you have to go through many intermediaries, so there is a bit of Chinese whispers that goes on. But these are all the things that I think are being refined and figured out on the way through. So it's possible to do it, but it's just one of the challenges of getting it right.
You often have PR. I mean, when it works really well is when you got PR, the client, and the media agency around, and the publisher around the table. That's where I find it works really well.
And I guess the only thing I'd add to that is that where we've had the most success in terms of achieving the quality of the product that we've been happy with as well, because that's really important. As Neil was saying, if you produce something that you wouldn't normally run as editorial content anyway, then you've actually done your readers a disservice and it won't work. So we just make sure that it's really clear, and certainly with Cosmo TV, we storyboarded everything, and the client was across it, so they understood. They did say, "Oh, can we have more of this?" Of course, that's what clients do. But if you can communicate what will happen in terms of connection with the audience, if it becomes too much like advertising, then they will back off pretty quickly. So I think just making sure that the parameters are very clear up front.
I think it's fascinating, and it's really encouraging to know that publishers like yourselves have the editorial is your focus as much as sales. One of the things that we've heard for a number of years now about in terms of criticisms about things like native or content marketing is that that journalism is completely compromised, and I think it's pretty clear that actually doesn't contribute to the business model. So you can't compromise your journalism. You have to keep your readers firmly focused on your readers and deliver quality, and that's been a theme, I think, from today. We have another question.
I work as a comms consultant for a bank, and it's very hard to sort of change the marketing manager's mind around the benefits of native advertising and around the online space. What were some of the arguments that you came up against and sort of ways that you addressed those sort of old thinkers and people that weren't willing to sort of face the facts that the old way of doing things wasn't always going to be the best way of doing things?
I'll just quickly jump in because I worked on a bank for a couple of years doing their social media monitoring and also having worked at Telstra. You come across a term called a content calendar, and the content calendar has the next 3 months of Facebook and Twitter updates, which then goes to the legal department to get approval. Some of these things you sort of can't fight. Defamation in media companies too, they don't want to have too many people writing stuff. So I would say you've just got to build the relationship, take it through the legal process. It's very hard on those big blue chip clients.
Perhaps one thought would be some case studies. If you look around at what other businesses, whether it's financial or otherwise, are doing in a similar space, there's some really great successes you can see. Neil mentioned Red Bull, which is not exactly a bank, but General Electric is doing and has done for some years really amazing work in this area. American Express is another one. So I think there's some good examples to draw on. Yeah,
there's also the ANZ Blue Note, which is their content site, which is kind of interesting to see a bank doing something along those lines.
Exactly.
We've done some work in the finance area and had quite a bit of success with it as well. It just really depends. I think though there has to be an element of risk in there. So you have to be prepared to take the punt, but at the same time, I think if you can go on that journey together as a team and maybe do a trial, like we've been doing a lot of trials of native, so we would try and make it price sensitive, so that it doesn't feel like there's a huge amount of risk associated with it, and also just provide really deep, rich analytics and feedback on the campaign, and hopefully people can be ushered into feeling more comfortable in those kind of environments. But I think as you start to see these shifts to become from being like a fringe thing to being something that is just the norm that everybody's doing, then you start to reach a tipping point, and the media agency says you should do this, and you say to them you should do this, and somebody else says you should do it, and eventually it just becomes the norm. I think we're not that far away from that, I would say.
Yeah. Also, on a practical basis, on Facebook with the Facebook Insights, you can actually go through a lot of what content have they had that's performed, what hasn't performed, and sort of, say everything in a positive light. Well, this was less performed for this one. This picture of a cat, that was really popular. Looking at the analytics, I think, can help.
But I think it's setting your campaign up for success as well. I mean, if you're a bank, you can do a campaign where you do a billion leaderboards. What's the chance that that's going to kind of convert? Probably, I don't know. There's a lot of risk, as opposed to a bank writing or sponsoring some content, really strong kind of earned content around things to know when you're buying a house or how to get the best mortgage or whatever. And that's really strong content. It's written by an editorial team, and then you amplify that content. So you can amplify it through tools like Outbrain, which surface it up across other sites. the people that come to the site have read good quality content, it's got the brand messaging, and then you retarget to those guys. So then someone's read the article, they've had the brand exposure, and then they start seeing the billion leaderboards around the web. Far more, I think, likelihood of success for a campaign rather than just serving up an ad and seeing what happens.
And just finally, because I know you probably want to get moving, I think I've traditionally had the most success with brands that have been very reluctant to step outside of their brand message, because what we're talking about is companies who want to control the brand message, and they are the blue chips generally, and banks fall into that category. Where we've had success is where we've shown that we really do understand the brand, and you know, so I've done a few native executions with banks, and they feel much more comfortable letting us do that if they feel that we understand their business. So spending a lot of time up front with the client is really, really important, and because, you know, and also too, if a bank is going to do it for the first time with a media outlet, then they probably would start with somebody that they feel is really close to the right product for them before they branch out to others. And so it's, you know, you kind of have to take them on a little journey where the trust builds with each step, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do we have any further questions down there? There's one down the back there.
Which bank is it?
Yeah, because Neil's going after their business.
Do you have a business card?
Yes, see these guys afterwards.
Okay. So my question is sort of building on that. For a smaller brand, what advice would you have for making the most of those platforms?
You've got to trial them. I mean, you can start very small on a lot of these different channels, and I still, some of the, like, I'm a bit in the advertorial, like sponsored content, native. I mean, there's all this sort of semantics around the definitions, but creating content in all these channels, getting people to engage with you, you can start off cheap. It's just a case of toe in the water sort of stuff.
I would suggest that frequency is still a really important issue in terms of if you're a small client and you have a limited budget, rather than scattergunning it, I'd choose a couple of businesses, you know, mine and Neil's, and work closely with us, because we can probably do more with that small budget and make it go further through our channels and really build some kind of rapport with an audience in a much bigger way than if you just throw it into programmatic, or, you know, put it into a whole bunch of different products where your reach and your visibility will be really low. And
that you don't know perhaps where the results are necessarily coming
exactly.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're much more accountable. I mean, the more money you spend, the harder we work as publishers. It's just, you know, it's just the way it is. So I think you get more value actually if you spend a small amount with one client than if you spend minuscule amounts with a lot. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it helps both advertising copywriters and writers of native content that they understand each other's disciplines going forward, as those sort of meet at a certain intersection now? Do you have any comment in regard to that?
Yeah, we don't have a distinction. It's the same team, so we don't have the church and state thing. That's a choice that some media companies have, and I think it works in a kind of hard news environment. You need to have some separation, but for our target audience of young people, and it tends to be around music or pop culture, we're not creating hard news, so we find it's much more successful to give the brand idea to the same editorial team. Content that's going to be well liked, well read, well shared. So we don't have that separation. Yeah,
and in this, obviously in the women's environment we don't either. But previously at private media it was distinct, and I found that the most effective people to take on that kind of advertising content writing were people who actually came from the editorial side. So knowing the brand is the most important thing. Otherwise you just can't be as effective.
Well, I think it's also an important point to emphasise, as you've just made, that there are many different types of journalism, and what we're talking about is not hard news. I think that is a good distinction to make. We've come to the end of a very, very interesting discussion. I'd like to thank Ben, Zach, Neil and Marina, and thank you for your attendance and your participation as well. and we've got a lot to think about as we go on. I'm really glad to hear the message that media is back.
Media is back.
And there's a positive future, so we'll look forward to it. Thank you very much.